Good morning, Dan and Amy. So President Obama gave his fond farewell. Bye, bye, bye.
Bye, 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 bye. And then a boy band came in, played behind him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Seems appropriate. More entertaining than the Greek columns. Here is President Obama talking about one of the threats to our democracy.
Look, politics is a battle of ideas. That's how our democracy was designed. In the course of a healthy debate, we prioritize different goals and the different means of reaching them. But without some common baseline of facts, without a willingness to admit new information and concede that your opponent might be making a fair point and that science and reason matter, then we're going to keep talking past each other.
Yeah.
And we'll make common ground and compromise impossible.
Yeah, things Obama dislikes intensely, talking past one another, failing to forge common ground, vilifying your opponents just because they disagree. Your opponents, those bigoted neo-Luddites. He dislikes when people vilify those bigoted neo-Luddites who disagree with him. You see?
Mm-hmm.
The sophistry knows no bounds with this president, and he shuffled off the stage, left a 54-minute speech, which now left-wing Chicago Press Corps and left-wing historians can memorialize into Obama's legacy. He just kind of did their homework for them, which is awfully thoughtful of him. For more on his speech, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Genevieve Wood. She's a senior contributor to the Daily Signal over at the Heritage Foundation. Genevieve, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan and Amy.
Morning. So, Genevieve, let me try and pique your imagination. If I told you 8 years ago that America would reverse a great recession, reboot our auto industry, and unleash the longest stretch of job creation in our history, if I told you we'd open up a new chapter with the Cuban people, shut down Iran's nuclear weapon program without firing a shot, and take out the mastermind of 9/11, if I told you we win marriage equality, secure the right to health insurance for 20 million of our fellow citizens, you might say we set our sets a little too high, Genevieve, but you'd be wrong because the President of the United States did all of those things. Do you agree?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that, he listed a number of those things as accomplishments, but what he neglected to say is that why did all those quote-unquote accomplishments turn into Democrats losing the White House, Democrats losing Congress, Democrats losing elected offices up and down the state ballot on his watch? If those were such great accomplishments that the American people were so proud of, why is the Democratic Party in disarray today? Why, when Hillary Clinton talked about all those things, was she unable to overcome and win the election and beat Donald Trump? I think it's because most Americans would say, we don't like a lot of those things. And frankly, even with a number of those things, you didn't get Congress to do it. You didn't get the American people to go along with it. You either used the stroke of your pen or the courts did it. And so, again, that's not leadership. That's not bringing consensus and all the other things that he talked about. That's kind of an imperial-type presidency, which is really what he turned out to be.
Well, and to that point, part of the speech, in my opinion, was this document to turn over to Scriveners to codify his legacy on his terms. The other part was a bit of a pep rally to a demoralized Democrat Party in Democrat base camp here in Chicago, talking about candidates running for office and getting involved, and he's sticking around and he's going to help because he is saying, without saying, that I leave the Democrat Party in super minority status.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, I mean, he often sounded to me like he was somebody who was actually running for office, not somebody who had just been in office for 8 years. It was like, here's all these things we still have to do, and here's how we're – and it was like, well, dude, you just been there for 8 years. Well, why I was a little surprised that he brought up the race issue because, frankly, I think race relations are definitely worse today in many respects than they were when he came into office and talked about, well, it's better than it was 30 years ago. Well, yeah, okay, most people would give you that. But what about over the last 8 years where we've had real times in this country where a president, especially America's first African-American president, could have stepped up and really done something on this issue? He, if anything, I would say stoked the flames. So he tried to rewrite history last night. As you rightly point out, I think a lot of folks on the left will kind of just eat it up. But the reality is history has a way of writing itself, and I think you're going to see it give him some fairly poor grades as time goes on.
Genevieve, I'm sure, I don't know why I was still surprised by this, that he didn't address the violence issue, the homicide rate in Chicago, didn't talk about the video, didn't talk about ending hate, and the way to end is admitting that it's out there. Were you surprised as well, or did you think that he was just going to gloss over that?
Well, I mean, and if you're giving a victory lap speech, I don't think you can count that as a victory. I think it only underlines what I was just saying about the race issue, of what a failure his administration has been, not just in terms of legislation. I mean, that's something that as a culture and a people we have to work through and talk through. It's not always something you can legislate, but that's where a president should be using, the bully pulpit and really using his office to try to bring people together. And instead, he praised the groups like Black Lives Matter, who may have, some worthy goals, but at the same time has done some things that I would argue, again, just really stoked the fire and did not bring the country together. But, he decided to leave that part out.
It seems to me one of Obama's rhetorical tricks that he's used for much of the past 8 years is to replace kind of flowery aspirational rhetoric where the record is indefensible. So, for example, we cannot withdraw from the big global fights, including to expand human rights. I mean, except in Syria. That to your point about him kind of running like it was a campaign, it's all kind of aspirational and forward-looking because it's difficult to go chapter and verse on the record and match that up with this glowing rhetoric that he is so fond of offering.
That's absolutely right. I mean, what about the part where he talked about the fact there had been no terrorist threats in America? I mean, you have to believe most people are sitting there saying, wait a minute, I thought I remember something happening. I mean, here's the truth. There have been over 90 Islamist-related terror plots aimed at the U.S. since 9/11. Most of those have occurred on his watch. No, not all in this country, but they've been aimed at us. But on his watch, San Bernardino, Fort Hood, Boston. I mean, you go through Orlando. You go through these plots that have actually happened here, and these are people that were either said they were connected to ISIS, inspired by ISIS, and he acts as though those things just don't matter. Or
they're delinked, or they're delinked from these terrorist organizations overseas. And the point is to say it's really kind of almost Clintonian parsing to say no foreign terrorist organization. Yeah, versus kind of these not so lone wolves, but these one-offs that have been radicalized by the work product of these terrorist organizations to do what they did. So he mentions Boston and San Bernardino and Orlando, but he disconnects it from ISIS.
Yeah, exactly. But I just don't think the people buy it. I think if you ask those here, do you feel safer today? Do you feel like we're safer from terrorists today than we were 8 years ago? I don't think most Americans would say, yeah, I feel good about that. I really feel good with our Iran deal, like they're really going to get along with us now. I don't think most Americans buy that, and it's why the Democrats are in the problem they're in. And I would argue if those who are still elected, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and all the folks in Congress, if they continue down this path and give the same speech over and over again over the next 2 years that he gave last night, and that's their answers to everything, I think it'll be interesting to see. And if Republicans keep their promises, I think it'll be interesting to see if Democrats can get anything back in the next election cycle. Because, again, I just don't think most Americans bought the picture he was trying to paint. Because, as you point out, he uses nice language, but people know what's underneath.
Genevieve, who do you think is going to be the next leader of the Democratic Party? Do you think Cory Booker? I mean, he's trying to make history today by testifying against Jeff Sessions. Or who else is there?
Well, it's a good question. I think that's one of the problems they have right now. And Republicans have been through this too. Who's it going to be? One of the biggest problems, I think, for Democrats is they really have depleted their farm team because they have lost so many seats at the state level, whether it's state legislators, whether it's governors. They really have lost kind of, that next group who should be coming up to the federal level. So there's slim pickings there. But, Republicans should be very careful because they have to go back and remember nobody knew who this guy named Barack Obama was about 10 years ago. And even then, he first started running, nobody thought he would have a chance to get somebody like Hillary Clinton. He came out of the blue. Nobody thought Donald Trump would be the next Republican candidate and next president. So you never know where it's going to come from. And usually something like that happens when the other side isn't doing what they promised voters they would do, isn't, fulfilling their campaign promises, like repealing Obamacare, for example. And so, while the Democrats look like they're down and out right now, and I do think they're down, you never count a political party out. And so, I don't think it's going to be Cory Booker because I think he's going to overstep today trying to be the guy who brings down Jeff Sessions, which I don't think he'll be successful in doing. But there'll be somebody. And Republicans, if they don't fulfill what they promised people in this election cycle, they'll be in trouble again.
And to that point, should Trump in his press conference today, should he focus on the future and resist the temptation to comment on what President Obama had to say yesterday, even some of his kind of cheap standard issue bigot baiting about investing in brown people and the like?
Yeah, I think he ought to move on because, look, one thing, he may want to say one or two things to say, what was said last night was rejected and move ahead. But, I think one thing that people should realize is Barack Obama isn't going away. So this will probably be something that Donald Trump and the new administration has to deal with for a while. He and his family are going to live in Washington after they leave the White House because I think his youngest daughter has a couple of years left in school here. I don't see Barack Obama just exiting the public stage. So he won't be given the platform he was given last night. But the left is going to want to keep him out there because there isn't another voice right now. And until there is one, I think they're going to regularly go to him. So, if I were Donald Trump, yes, I would focus on the future. But I'm sure he is with his Twitter account and the like,
yes,
prepared to respond to him in the future.
All right. She is Genevieve Wood, senior contributor to the Daily Signal over at the Heritage Foundation, thedailysignal.com. Genevieve, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you both.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.